before I begin, of course, we've all been horrified, spellbound, so sad about the situation that's been happening in this past week in Israel and Gaza. I think as a foreign policy group, we're particularly, everybody is tuned to it. I think we look at it somehow as, why don't people learn? It is so frustrating. Why do we keep on going over this? And in our sessions, we've seen the consequences of this, and it is very frustrating. So I suppose that for us, we can only hope by having sessions like this on foreign policy that we bring back over and over that leadership counts, good leadership, wise leadership, and also citizen involvement. So thank you for joining us and keeping all of this in mind. And with those people in Israel and Gaza, certainly our thoughts and prayers are with everyone. This is our third program, and we're very excited about our new guest. As you know, the history of Mexico and the United States are very entwined. As a result of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which was signed between the United States and Mexico in 1848, a number of our states owe their birth and their existence to those. And those states include California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, Colorado, parts of Oklahoma, Kansas, and Wyoming. Mexico also relinquished their claims to Texas and recognized the Rio Grande as the southern boundary of the United States. So for so many reasons, our history and culture have been tied to Mexico for, now over a century and a half, for a long period of time. So, and today, I think we've also now recognized that between Mexico and the United States, Mexico is our largest trading partner, which now exceeds Canada and China. So in terms of population, 11% of our population consider themselves as having full or partial Mexican heritage, or 37.4 million people. So the linkage, our history, is very intertwined with Mexico. And now let's move on to our program. We're very excited. I want to introduce Don Shields, who will introduce our speaker. We will then follow an interview format. We will then open, or Tyler will then draw on the members of the discussion group for further questions. And during this period of time, please use your Q&A. I'm monitoring it, and I will read your questions for Gaspar to also answer. So we're looking forward to this. We will learn much. Thank you. So Don, to you.
Thank you, June. Our topic for today is Mexico-U.S. relations. The United States and Mexico relaunched the High-Level Economic Dialogue, the HLED, in 2021. The latest meeting of this group was 2 weeks ago on September 29th, 2023. Through HLED, the United States and Mexico have deepened economic integration. As June said, the U.S.-Mexico trade in goods and services surpassed $864 billion in 2022, an all-time high. Into 2023, that's this year to date, Mexico has become the United States' largest partner for total trade in goods. In early 2022, last year, we had Andrew Rudman, director of the Wilson Center's Mexico Institute, give us a summary of U.S.-Mexico relations, covering trade, migration, and other topics of interest from an American perspective. Today, we have someone who will also talk about U.S.-Mexico relations, but give us more of a Mexican viewpoint on what is going on. We have Dr. Gaspar Rivera-Salgado with us. Dr. Rivera-Salgado is Project Director of the University of California, Los Angeles Center for Labor Research and Education. He teaches classes on labor and social justice and also on immigration issues. He directs the Institute for Transnational and Social Change. Two of his publications of note are Mexican Migration in the United States and Just Neighbors, Research on African American and Latino Relations in the United States. Did you know, and I just learned this, that combined Blacks and Latinos are the majority in 7 out of the largest 10 American cities? We have asked Gaspar to look at the U.S.-Mexico relations from the Mexico perspective. I and others on the Chappaqua Library Foreign Affairs team will question Gaspar in an interview fashion from the start of today. Gaspar, please speak up and introduce yourself, and so that they know which of these lovely people that are on our screen is you.
Good morning, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be with you all, and thank you for accommodating me. I'm in Los Angeles, California, 3 hours before you all. So we're just waking up, and thank you, Don, for the ongoing conversation that we had already. And I'm very eager to engage in a dialogue with you all.
So my first question for you, Gaspar, is what do Mexicans think of the renewed work on the wall across their northern border? I mean, this is in all the news now that Biden has changed his viewpoint and is going to build some more wall.
Right. I think that when we speak about Mexico, we need to speak about also the diversity of points of view. Of course, we have the political elite who might have a specific point of view, and that's how they run and win elections, right? Because they have a very specific platform. And in Mexico, you would need to know that there are 3 major political parties. One of them was just created actually 5 years ago, and is the party of the current president. And that party is called Morena, the National Movement for Renovation. And that party was formed as a coalition from members of the leftist political party, of the PRI, and some independent voters. And they won a supermajority 5 years ago. We're going to have elections again next year that fall within the U.S. calendar of elections. So that's one, that we have a new political party that is governing Mexico. And this political party is a mixture of a nationalist, populist, pragmatic political party. On the other side, we have the old traditional parties, the PRI that governed Mexico since after the Mexican Revolution until the transitions in the 1990s. Then we have the PAN, which is the right to center political party that was successful actually in winning the presidential elections with the first president outside of Vicente Fox from the PAN. And then we have a very small, tiny leftist political party, the PRD, that actually was the party that was positioning as the major force for political transition in Mexico when they launched the candidacy of Cuauhtémoc Cárdenas, the son of a beloved president, Lázaro Cárdenas. So this is important to know because from all these political parties, there is one consensus, and one consensus is that the United States dominate foreign relations for Mexico. And for a long time, that is the paradigm that elected officials have to wrestle, how to deal with the fact that we are neighbors to the largest economy in the world, the wealthiest country in the world, and with a lot of interest So it was interesting that during the presidency of Donald Trump, it was very publicly how Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador was thankful for Donald Trump for not paying too much attention to Mexico. That was his take. It's like Donald Trump was distracted with so many things, with China, with Europe, and Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador wanted to keep it that way. And that's very telling, right? That for a Mexican president that won a mandate, felt liberated, but not having a very close relationship to the United States. And what I think we need to discuss that more. But also, he was very critical. The only point that he was critical was the attempt to build the wall, and of course, the very public debate that ensued that not only the United States was going to build a wall, but Mexico should pay for it because it was meant to stop immigrants coming to the United States. And there you have, in that debate, you have one of the most important axes of conversation between the United States and Mexico. And I'm glad that you had a conversation about how the United States views the bilateral relations with Mexico. So being a Mexican myself teaching in the United States, I want to share with you a little bit about what is the point of view of Mexicans in looking and managing these relationship, complex relationship, I should say, with the United States. So regarding the wall, you know, there's in the United States, it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure you went over this, but the polls in general, most of the people in the United States agree that building a wall is not a good idea. And most of the people would agree that immigration, at least they're neutral, or they would agree that it's not too bad for the United States. But this, if you go down to regions, so for example, border states will have a more complicated view of this issue because they're the ones who are closer to the problem. So one shift in the United States is what they call how states, like your own state, New York State, is changing its opinion because now they're getting a lot of buses from Texas and from Florida of migrants. So a lot of New York, especially residents in New York City, feel that they're in a border state because now they have the immigration problem closer to home. In the same context, for a long time, let's remember that Mexico was a sending country of migrants. And this really was started in big numbers during the Bracero program. At the onset of World War II, the United States and Mexico signed a bilateral agreement to allow Mexican braceros, farm workers, to come legally to the United States during the war effort. Of course, because you needed young hands to pick up the crops in the fields. This is interesting because, of course, already Mexican migration was a thing in the late 1920s. Already Texas and especially California were dependent of these force. But during the Bracero program, from 1942 to 1964, this program was expanded. Close to 5 million contracts were signed. So this really cemented the dependency, especially of agriculture, to the access to labor from Mexico. So this was a bilateral agreement. Of course, initially was meant to be temporary, but as everybody knows in foreign relations, there's nothing more permanent than a temporary workers program, because you bring people with their whole histories and they establish themselves in the host country. And this is the same place, for example, in the same issue with Turkish workers in Germany, right? With North African workers in France and in the Netherlands. Those early migration started as temporary workers program, but that really institutionalized the dependency to this labor. So from the point of view of Mexico, really, migration to the United States was very controlled early on. And it's not until 1964 that there were changes under President Kennedy with the immigration system, that the national quota system was lifted, and family reunification was instituted. With this program, there was a major shift in the origins of migration, and all of a sudden you had Mexico and Latin America and Asia as the major sources of migration. From the perspective of Mexico, really Mexicans did not start migrating in big numbers until the economic crisis of 1980. This might be surprising to everybody, but up to 1980, Mexico was growing a lot, especially during the Mexican miracle period, the post-war boom. Cities were being built. There were major industrial cities in the north, Mexico City. There was the Green Revolution actually was started in Mexico, in the northern fields of Sinaloa, where agriculture was expanding, and also in Baja California Peninsula. So there were a lot of jobs. Also, there was a program that started in the 1970s called the Border Industrialization Program. This is the maquiladora. So for a long time, folks within Mexico, since the economy was growing a lot of rural residents were going to Mexico City, Monterrey, Guadalajara. They were going to the fields of Sinaloa. They were going to the maquiladoras in the north. So it's interesting that exponential, massive migration to the United States did not start until the mid-1980s with the collapse of the Mexican economy. And also, this is a period of expansion in the service sector, especially in the United States. So there were some push factors, and so there were some forces of attraction. Well, from 1985 to the year 2000, we saw the most extensive exodus from one country to another. Almost 10% of the Mexican population came to the United States. This is close to 12 million people. So this is the origins, really, of this massive expansion of migrants to the United States. And also, of course, and maybe this is a topic for another conversation with you. What was the meaning? Because now that migration really stopped for 10 years, and now it's coming back in a different form. And I think during that period, from 1985 to the year 2000, Mexicans in general saw Mexico as a country that saw migration as the main issue for migration. So a lot of people were interested about the fate of these immigrants in the United States, the way they were crossing, the way they were incorporating themselves into the US economy, into the US society. For a long time, that was very attractive to Mexicans. The fact that you could have someone in your family who could have access to a job in the United States, because they would really experience economic mobility. And this is the other major factor, the wage differential. We're neighbors. There are corporations operating on both sides of the border for major corporations such as, for example, General Motors builds cars on both sides of the border. Ford, Chrysler. One of the major private sector employers in Mexico is Walmart. Believe it or not, is one of the major employers. But you see, if you work for one of these companies in the United States, the minimum wage in California is $15 per hour. Just keep that in mind. If you work for one of these corporations in Mexico, chances are that you make a little bit over the minimum wage. And chances are that you make about 300 pesos a day. At the exchange rate, that means that you make about $4.50 a day. So just think about that. The wage differential is huge. So that's one of the issues that I think we need to keep in mind. When we say about what are the incentives, what is the luring attraction to come north and to expose yourself to a lot of danger? Well, there's it's a 8 times wage differential. You could be earning 8 times more if you work for the same company, if you harvest strawberries in San Quintin, Mexico, you make 300 pesos a day, 450 a day. If you cross the border and go pick strawberries in Oxnard, California, you make $15 per hour. So I think that that is one of the bases of this migration. On the other hand, you need to know that, migrating north is not as easy from the Mexican perspective. From the United States, it seems like anyone who wants can come across the border. But that's farther from the truth. If you're in Mexico, I'm from the southern state of Oaxaca, which is a very rural state with a lot of small villages. You don't just wake up one morning in one of these small villages and say, hey, gee, I'm going to go to New York State because that looks nice, or I'm going to go to California. You need to be able to have several things in order to migrate. And one of those things is a network, or either family, close family, or co-ethnics from your served village who can share the knowledge of a network. How is it that you're going to finance the trip? Where are you going to cross if you don't have any papers? Where are you going to land in the United States? How are you going to get a job? How are you going to start when you don't have a job in the first few weeks? How are you going to survive? All these are very important questions from the Mexican perspective. So not everybody that wants to come is able to come because simply is not possible. You have to have the network, you have to have the financial resources, and you need to have the support of people who are going to take care of you once you land in the United States. So from the Mexican perspective, the process of migration is not as chaotic. It's actually very well organized because it responds to this network. It responds to information. It responds to opportunity. Of course, and this is the big change, I think we need to pay attention to the shift in paradigm. I'm talking about mostly economic migration. People who sort of think that they're going to migrate because they want to experience economic mobility. So building a wall for these Mexicans is like, well, you build a wall and we will manage to overcome that wall. It will not stop us, really. And this is the history of all the attempts to build walls, right? I mean, it will not deter people. But the big change now, and this is maybe that we can have a conversation, is how the flow of immigrants, not only coming from Mexico, but also coming from Central America, especially Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, and now the extensive, massive humanitarian crisis of folks coming from the southern cone. These are thousands of Haitians who had migrated to Brazil first, who are coming north now because Brazil is an economic crisis. The massive exodus of Venezuelans who are fleeing the collapse of their country. I mean, they have to cross, just imagine. For Mexicans, it's only one border and one wall. These immigrants coming from South America, these Venezuelans have to cross the Darien Strait, the border between Colombia and Panama, which is, miles and miles of terrible jungle. They have to cross Central America. They have to cross Mexico to finally arrive to the United States. The same thing with Central Americans. Salvadorans have to go through Guatemala and then to Mexico. So the big change is that there's this flow coming north is changing from economic migrants to mostly people fleeing violence and disasters back home. And this is so the how we think about immigration we need to adjust that. It's not only economic migrants, but it's now people seeking political refuge. They're looking for political asylum. They're fleeing their homelands because there's nothing there. In a way, this is the other thing that we need to think about US-Mexico relations, right? I mean, we see the two major countries right now that dominate the news, Ukraine and Russia, two countries that are at war, right? There's dispute and they went to war. And now Palestinians and Jewish. Another two neighbors who have long-term conflict since the World War II. So the United States and Mexico, we have shared this border for more than 200 years. Actually, very recently, we celebrated the 200 years of foreign relations. And we have been at war only once. And hopefully, we have learned a lesson, right? There's no winners, only losers in a war. So how do two neighboring countries manage different issues? So for example, use the issue of migration with very different perspectives, right? The priorities of the United States seems to me now, from even the Trump administration and the current Biden administration, is let's stop them at the border. I don't care what cost, if you have to build a wall, if you have to send the National Guards, you have to increase the mobilization of ICE, you need to stop them at the border. From the Mexican perspective, there are more reasons, right? Your country is not only a country that sends migrants to the United States, but also Mexico is the main bridge of migration of all these immigrants coming from Central America and South America. And there is a tremendous pressure from the United States to force Mexico to really do something more active to deter migrants from the north, because everybody knows that these migrants coming from Venezuela, from the southern cone, these migrants coming from Central America, and the migrants coming from Mexico, all of them want to go to the United States. So the US policy is trying to really have a series of incentives, especially with Mexico and Guatemala, so that they could increase their border action. Flipping the coin, I think that Mexico, and especially in their conversations with Central America, are also very interested in managing this flow, but from the perspective about this new issue that is called the right to stay home. In other words, yes, we've been talking about the right to migrate and how you can do it in safe ways, in a humane way to come into the United States. And we're thinking that the main paradigm is people wanting to leave. But what if you flip the question, the way Mexico and Central America are talking about it? What do we need to do in order for these citizens to fulfill their dreams, to fulfill their potential socially, economically, and politically? What do we need to do in the places of origin so that they have the right to be happy at home? It's not, I mean, some people would argue that that's mostly the very conservative view in the United States to say, hey, stay home. But I think this reframing of the question, the right to stay home, means political transformation, means economic transformation, and means also dialogue with the United States from the South to say, hey, listen, is deterrence and building a wall, more patrol and more use of force won't stop the flow. Why? Because the root origins, the causes of this migration are very complex. Let's start thinking about how we can help the transformation of the communities of origin so that ultimately people don't see migration as the only option. They would see migration maybe as the last option, but they would have other reasons to stay at home. So I think that from the perspective of Mexico now, transforming itself from a sending country to being the recipient of migrants, you can see how, for example, the Haitian migrants who arrived in Tijuana 15 years ago, now we're seeing the first ones that are graduating from college. This was the first wave of Haitians were, professionals. They adapted, they incorporated, many of them stay in Mexico, and now they're becoming professionals. They're becoming the leaders of this community in cities like Tijuana, shaping the policy. Also, for a long time, Mexico, and this is what some people argue, that Mexico should really go back to its history as a safe haven during the Spanish Civil War of the 1930s. Mexico extended open arms to the Spanish refugees that came to Mexico and who had a tremendous positive effect in Mexico society. They started one of the most famous colleges in Mexico, El Colegio de Mexico, which is a well-regarded university. In the 1970s, 1980s, there was a massive exodus of Guatemalan fleeing the civil war in Guatemala, who settled into Mexico. Eventually, Mexico had a legalization process, and Mexico gave land to these peasants of Mayan origin who were from Guatemala, who had settled in Mexico, and they granted them citizenship. So there is this also history of Mexico, and some people would argue that Mexico should open with open arms these immigrants from Central America. After all, we look the same. Nobody on the streets could see the difference between a Mexican, a Guatemalan, a Salvadoran, or Honduras. And so we could also serve as a safe haven for a lot of these immigrants. However, Mexico is also a country with limited resources, and that is the debate where the debate lies on. What to do? How do you use your limited resources? And there's always this issue about using it for your citizens or using it to help the foreign, because usually the foreigners are seen as the outsider, are seen as the other. And I think there's a lesson we need to learn here. The other is a human being. The other, that immigrant, is a father, a mother, is a child. And when we have these debates that they humanize the other, whoever that other is, we tend to make decisions so not to complicate our lives. But actually, it's a complicated one. What to do with the other when we see their humanities, when we see that these are Venezuelan mothers fleeing with their kids? What rights would they have? What kind of protections would they have? So I think that this debate would be interesting in what is the main question that we're trying to respond? If from the United States is to stop these immigrants at the southern border, then this nation question in Mexico about the right to stay home might help us see the other side, might help us see and get to the roots of the origins of migration. So Don, that would be my short answer. I have a longer answer, but I'll stop right there for this question. Go ahead.
It's a wonderful answer, because you've explained lots to us already. In the beginning of your answer, you talked about how your president at the time was trying to get Trump's attention. And it reminds me 40 years ago when our senior Trudeau, the father of our present prime minister in Canada, made a speech in which he said that he saw Canada as a mouse living next to an elephant, and the mouse and the elephant are both in bed, and when the mouse turns over, the elephant doesn't pay any attention, but when the elephant turns over, the mouse is starting to worry. So
I like that. There you go. We share that same thing.
So we share the other sides of the border. Anyway, you also remind me during your answer to ask the question about, I understand that Mexico has many views towards things, but when you're dealing with the government, would Mexico consider what has happened to Turkey, in the sense that Turkey has agreed with the common market, Europe in general, to hold back migrants coming through Turkey towards France and Germany and whatever. And the condition that Turkey demanded to hold these people was that they receive billions, literally billions of euros a year. Would Mexico consider something like that if the United States were to come and start a discussion along the same lines, or not? Or the other part of that question is, what at one time Trump stopped people from coming across the border, and made them stay in Mexico while they applied to come north. So this is all gathered together somehow, this thing. And so I question you as to how would any of this work, or how did it work?
Yeah. So let's think the arrangement with Turkey within the European community is within the shared framework of developing joint immigration policies that the European community agreed to as part of that. So it is interesting to see the experiment that the North American region has had. Remember, we had something initially called the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, and now that was 4 years ago was renegotiated and was renamed the U.S.-Mexico Canada Trade Agreement. In Mexico, it's called the Mexico Tratado Mexicano Canadiense Estados Unidos. So it's a little bit different. Everybody puts their name first, but in the US, it's called the U.S.-Mexico Canada Trade Agreement. This trade agreement is very limited. It focuses on trade, commerce, and the flow of information and money and investment. They leave in immigration out. So that is interesting. However, because of these U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, the flows of goods and services have increased dramatically in the North American region. Don't you mention how Mexico just surpassed China as the main trading partner? Well, that's not an accident. You have basically a framework that that focuses on increasing that flow, and this is interesting. This is in response to China, basically. So Mexico is becoming the recipient of a lot of foreign investment. So it's interesting that this agreement does not focus on migration. However, Trump did something unprecedented. He used the economic leverage of the United States to force Mexican hands on something unrelated to commerce, and this is immigration coming from Central America. So, for example, because of the pandemic, the U.S. government instituted a temporary restriction based on public health that the United States would not be able to accommodate the massive flow of the immigrants coming from Central America. And they said because of public health reasons, they had to stay in Mexico. But this is unprecedented because it had a tremendous impact on Mexico. All of a sudden, Mexico had to realize that these immigrants were not gonna just go through Mexico as a bridge. They were gonna stay here. And that really had a lot of impact. On the other hand, also, President Trump said, and we're going to pressure Mexico so they can do this. They expanded the revision of every single truck coming across the border as a matter of policy. The border almost came to a halt. And they said to Mexico, if you don't do something about the southern border in Guatemala, we're going to increase this. So in a way, there wasn't an official proposal, like in the case of Turkey, to say, okay, let's be explicit about this, right? It was, should you say, an experiment on the part of the United States to say how far they can go. Of course, it's not a win-win situation because if you hold the border, a lot of your economy is going to hurt in the United States. But for the first time, Mexico deploy the National Guard to the southern border. For the first time, out of these on temporary basis. Of course, now when nobody's paying attention, Biden is very distracted. He's not looking at Mexico. So now the news is that, of course, these National Guards have, are no longer stationed in the southern border, but the flows of immigrants are coming over. And Mexico has started bilateral conversations with the presidents of Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala to try to figure something out. And then the Mexican president just met and this is interesting, with the presence of Chile, with the presence of Colombia, Brazil, and Mexico to start to addressing something about Venezuela. So this is interesting. Chile, Brazil, and Colombia have leftist governments, and they view Mexico as an ally. Of course, it's different in Central America. You have presidents that are more to the right of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, so there's not a good relationship with President Bukele from El Salvador, for example. There's more of a relationship with the president of Honduras, and Guatemala is going to have a new president, and maybe the president-elect, who's a well-known liberal intellectual, he's going to work together with Andrés Manuel López Obrador. But this new president will take office in December. So I think there are efforts on the part of Mexico not to wait. The United States is very distracted with world affairs right now. It's a difficult world right now. Just thinking about Ukraine-Russia conflict, thinking about Israel and the Palestinian conflict. Now I think there is the opportunity for Mexico to exercise its muscle. Remember that for the United States, Mexico is a little mouse, but for Latin America, Mexico is such a privileged position. And this is the other news, right? Mexico's economy is doing very well right now. Inflation rate is low. Mexico didn't go into debt, and that was a heavy criticism for Andrés Manuel López Obrador. He didn't institute any cash assistance for people under COVID. So this is interesting because he said that he learned from the 1980s. Don't go into debt. Try to maneuver this crisis. So they didn't go into debt. Investment is coming. It's a long time has. Everybody's investing in Mexico. Europe, China, and the United States is investing in Mexico as the concept of nearshoring is coming. Also, the remittances are helping. So you have a confluence of a lot of things. Mexico landed the pandemic crisis in a very good way. So right now, Andrés Manuel López Obrador on his last year is going on these trips abroad to Latin America, trying to figure out what would be the alternative policy vis-a-vis the policy of containment that you're mentioning, Don, the policy of subcontracting southern neighbors to do the migration work, right? How would you do that? And there's already, of course, it's easier to do it in Central America because those countries depend so heavily on U.S. foreign assistance. That's actually, they've been very explicit during the last visit of Vice President Kamala Harris to Central America. She was very explicit and she told them, we love you, Central American countries, but please don't come to the United States. That was very explicit. And these are very smaller countries and they can be more explicit about what they wanted to do, but not in the case of Mexico. Mexico is a bigger country, it's a more diverse country. But I think the proposal is on the table, Don. It's not official that the United States wants Mexico and Guatemala, back-to-back countries, to do more to contain immigration. And in the case of Mexico, they're trying to think how to address the root causes of migration. And this is instability and poverty in these countries. How can we develop a program? And actually, these are in this recent trip of Andrés Manuel López Obrador to South America, where he visited with President of Chile, President of Colombia, and the President of Brazil. They're thinking about new arrangements, new foreign assistance to Venezuela, for example, to stabilize that country. New foreign assistance, especially to countries like Honduras. El Salvador is a different model. It's they're unique. But Guatemala in this transition also will need a lot of help. So they're trying to articulate this idea that we need to really address the root causes. And these are the issues of poverty, employment, and violence. And how to deal with those is very difficult. If you look around the world, this is the endemic problem in places like Afghanistan, Iraq, right? The poverty, unemployment, and insecurity. This is a perennial problem. This is the problem in a lot of countries in Africa. This is the main issue that got out of hand in Haiti, right? Where you have, gangs running the country, people with guns, because the rule of law has vanished. So I think that at the end, you want people to fix their problems, not through the process of war, but through a political process. And that means that in a democracy, people don't kill each other. We talk over about our problems. We vote. We were very passionate about that. But you don't take up arms. And I think that's the main thing. And this is one of the things that Mexico is facing, right? Especially with violence. The levels of violence are unprecedented. Armed narco traffickers are gaining terrain. They've been contained so far, but now they're expanding to places like Ecuador, the Colombians had expanded for a long time. So this is not a unique problem of Mexico. But I think Mexico has tried different formulas to address this issue. Under President Jorge Calderon in the early 2000s, he mobilized the army actually to confront, face on the narco traffickers. And that's the most violent period in Mexico, because the army is meant to go out there and kill people. It's not meant to do policing. A soldier is not gonna read your Miranda rights or is going to conduct an investigation. A soldier is sent to the field to kill the enemy. And what are you going to do with narcotraficantes, which is not an army? It's embedded with civil society. It's embedded in neighbors. They're not, so it's like a civil war. It's that kind of fighting an enemy that is not an army, that is not in uniform, and it doesn't have a central command. So it was very tragic. And I don't think Mexicans want to go there. They don't want to go on another war. They want to really expand dealing with narco trafficking, further US-Mexico cooperation, arresting the heads, going after the money laundering operations, going after, there are tools that can be used. And I think that is going to be, and that is dominating these Mexican upcoming presidential elections, what to do with the levels of violence coming for the narcos. And I think we're still trying to find that solution. Is not an easy one, but it's going to require international cooperation, definitely. So I'm going to stop here. Maybe you have other questions, and I know we're running out of time.
We're getting there. We're getting there. We're getting there. Is this crime one of the drivers for Mexicans to go north?
It's one of the driving forces, especially in states like Guerrero. You see an increase in the number of migrants coming from Guerrero, and Guerrero and Chiapas are one of the two states now embedded in huge fights with narcos. These are the states to the south, bordering Guatemala. These are rural states. And for the last 10, 15 years, they have seen a tremendous increase in drug production. And a lot of communities are fleeing north, not only to Mexico City, to Sinaloa, to Baja, but to the United States, displaced by this. For a long time, the profile of Mexicans coming north had been shifting from, it was for 100 years, West Central Mexicans. These are 5 states that contributed the most to migration. This is Jalisco, Zacatecas, Durango, Guanajuato, and Michoacan. But more and more, other states have been incorporated, and it's interesting that more and more is urban. migrants. So if you see, for example, migrants to New York City, and other parts of New York, these are coming from large urban centers such as Monterrey, Mexico City, and Puebla. This is interesting because, migration has diversified. The latest wave of migrants is coming from some of these places that have been hardest hit by drug violence. And this is Chiapas and Guerrero. For a long time, Zacatecas, Michoacan, Jalisco, these are states with a lot of violence. And it's interesting that you don't see such a tremendous upsurge of migrants from those states coming north. That is interesting. You see it from Guerrero and Chiapas, but not from these states that you would think. I mean, the levels of violence in Zacatecas, Michoacan, and Jalisco is huge, and even Guanajuato, but you don't see an uptick in non-migration. I think we should pay attention to that. So it's more regionalized, Dawn, in southern Mexico. And I think that's where these people are coming north, and these are more displaced by local violence. Because also this is the place that is expanding and experiencing the major economic boom is the what we call the Bajío Belt. And this is Querétaro, Guanajuato, Hidalgo, and parts of Jalisco. There are many foreign business settling there, manufacturing plants. So this is the industrial belt north of Mexico City that's seen an expansion, and that is attracting actually a lot of these immigrants. So you see these regionalizations. Also north, the state of Nuevo León, where Monterrey is expanding dramatically. That's where the new Tesla plant will be. So there are many good jobs in these states, and I think that is not as much investment in the South. So you can see a correlation there. Go ahead, Don.
Thank you. I'm going to open up the question and answering if there are questions and answers out there, but certainly I want to open it up to Peter and Naomi and Tyler and June, see if they have any questions of you or comments that they want to make. So go ahead, Naomi.
Gaspar, just to add another huge wrinkle to this, and thank you for all of your comments. No, don't smile. This will not be nice.
I will wait.
With the climate crisis worsening by the day, what do you think the impact will be, and how do we plan for it? With migration already coming north, resistance, which is entirely possible to increase in the U.S. politically, because we're not so well organized politically right now. What do you think?
Well, no, I think that this is, Naomi, thank you for that question, because that's a reality check. Honestly, we need our political systems to work. And the political system is designed to make tough decisions, to negotiate tough decisions. And I think that in Mexico, we're having elections. Right now, there are 2 women actually leading the polls. 2 women have been nominated in Mexico by the major political parties. The party of the president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Their candidate is Claudia Sheinbaum, the daughter of Jewish Polish immigrants who was born in Mexico and who has a doctorate in environmental sciences from Berkeley, whose main platform is to deal with the global environmental crisis. So that is interesting, and who has a great mind. But a little bit like the United States, the political system is very polarized in Mexico. So you have all those following the party of the current president, and then you have a coalition of parties who oppose anything that Andrés Manuel López Obrador does. And I think the United States, you have this, I mean, let's look at the situation in the House of Representatives, Naomi, right? I mean, we're back again with we're back again with a leaderless House of Representatives, and I don't know how that's gonna play out. But if they don't have a leader, a Speaker of the House in place, soon the government is paralyzed. It doesn't matter all the great ideas that you have. It doesn't matter all the great public policies. There are crises right now. Aid to Ukraine and Israel is nowhere because there's not a way to make decisions. And this is about on the short term. There are long-term problems that require even a more difficult discussion. Environment, violence, narco-trafficking in the United States, drug trafficking, the crisis of fentanyl, right? That is, it has multiple sources. I mean, it's produced in Mexico with ingredients from China, and then it's exported to the United States. So how are we going to address this issue if the United States and China are not talking to one another? Mexico has a hard time dealing with the armed drug cartels and the violence. I mean, these are, I think, crises that can get out of control, and we see where this leads us. I mean, we see failed states like Haiti. I hate to put it this way, but where you don't have a working state that can address these issues. Look what happened. The rule of the land is armed thugs, and that's I don't think we want to go that way. But the only way we can agree on discussing tough issues, making sometimes choices, is through the political process, and it's through dialogue. So how are we going to set up the table if within our own countries there is this polarization? There are people who think the world is black and white, right? And I think spaces like this allow us to imagine, to listen to different perspectives, and to think, okay, I'm going to put myself in the shoes of these other people and see what they think. And then I'm going to check my own ideas, my own interpretations, and come to a different conclusion. But these are not easy problems, Naomi, and thank you for bringing that up. But it requires us to organize politically to make decisions, and also to come to set up a table of dialogue. But to be honest, that's the question of the day.
Well, you're in good company.
Yeah.
Tyler, what about you? Have you got a question? Yes, your hand is up.
Yeah, I do. Gaspar, could you please clarify your thoughts on what you think President Lopez Obrador's objectives are in terms of dealing with the U.S.? It seems often that his thoughts are somewhat erratic and unpredictable, that his views of a lot of major issues are somewhat ambiguous. Now, maybe that's my fault that I'm not interpreting them correctly, but I get the feeling that AMLO, as we call him, is kind of an unpredictable factor out there. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I appreciate that, Taylor. I think that Andrés Manuel López Obrador is a politician hard to put in a box. Exactly for what you're saying. He doesn't have a doctrine as the past presidents would have. So for a long time, the main paradigm, even from the PRI to the PAN, both they emphasize a good, positive relationship of support with the United States, except for the 1970s, where Mexico, was one of the founders of the third way. But with in the 1980s and 1990s, Mexico went back with, especially Carlos Salinas de Gortari illustrated this. A good relationship to the United States is a good thing for Mexico. Andrés Manuel López Obrador wasn't a guy who had traveled the world widely. Andrés Manuel López Obrador really is what we call a populist nationalist president. That's why you don't see him interested in foreign relations as much. It is interesting that it is only in his last 2 years, last year and this year, that he's traveling extensively. For the first 3 years, 4 years of his presidency, he didn't travel that much. Of course, the pandemic was here. He sold, this is a good sign, he sold the presidential airplane because he thought it was a waste of money because he wasn't gonna use it. Just, it's a sign of how disconnected he was. And he elected Marcelo Ebrard as his Secretary of Foreign Relations. Marcelo Ebrard, of course, is highly liked in the international scene. He's a truly charming guy, but he's very accommodating to the United States. And that was the point of tension with Andres Manuel, right? And also that was his escape valve, that Marcelo Ebrard was very accommodating. Andres Manuel didn't have to make many pronouncements. And I think that's where the confusion comes from, Taylor, that he wasn't interested in really foreign affairs. For the first 3 years, he focused exclusively on building his domestic agenda. And I think you could say, I mean, at 68% of approval rating, going into his last year, with the economy expanding, with the peso stronger than ever, with inflation at low levels, you could say that his domestic agenda was very successful, not his international agenda. And it is very telling that now he's very ambivalent. He goes to South America and meets with the leftist elected political presidents of Chile, Boric, with Lula in Brazil, and with the president of Colombia. I mean, you could read in that he's very attracted to these kinds of leftist politics there. You know, for a long time, people thought that he was another Hugo Chavez. Of course, he's farther from the truth. But now he's lacking in terms of leadership for Central America. He could call to a meeting and he could be a leader, try to look for a solution with Guatemala, with Honduras, with El Salvador, and he hasn't done it. So that's disappointing too, right? He goes to South America, but he doesn't meet with this. He's not putting the same amount of energy in Central America. Why is that? And my argument is that he wants to take care of domestic politics first. And in this way, he appears not to really being fully engaged with the United States, which is, you know, a shame. And he allowed Marcelo Ebrard to do the dirty work, in other words. So that would be my reading, but his approach is working for Mexican politics. He is the president with the largest approval rate going on to his last year. And I think that's a big accomplishment, and that's what he wanted to do.
Peter, how about you?
Yes, I want to follow up, please, on the foreign affairs, foreign policy perspective, and focus on Venezuela refugees, asylees. And I think, as we all know, there's something like 90 million displaced people in the world these days, and 4 million or so, that's almost 5%, are from Venezuela. And you talked a little bit about the flow dynamic through Mexico. And you also talked about how the president has taken an interest in trying to work with other countries on this. So my question is there really a formulated policy to help Venezuela get back on course, led by Mexico? And secondly, how and will the president call on the US to help carry out such a policy? Because the US, I think, as you said earlier, is distracted with other things and is not really paying consistent attention to Venezuela. Will Mexico do it?
There are the first baby step towards that, and this is pushed by the new Colombian administration. Remember, they're neighbors with Venezuela. They've been getting actually 1/3 of all these refugees. They have gone to Colombia, and they have gone across the Andes into Peru and Ecuador, actually. So those were the first countries where these Venezuelans have been displaced. And then another big number are coming north through the Darien Strait in Central America. And they're the ones that is, I think, if there's a humanitarian crisis, I look at Haiti and Venezuela as Exhibit A. I mean, these are countries with tremendous disadvantage. In the case of Venezuela, you could say that is not violence, but is politically a failed political system. And now I think Maduro is recognizing that. And I don't know if you read the news, but Maduro has now agreed to sitting down with the intervention of Colombia, Brazil, and Chile and Mexico to start conversations about transformation of the political system in Venezuela. Venezuela is such a tragic story. It was the pearl of South America in the 1970s, 1980s. This was a country that was exporting oil. It was a country with a massive infrastructure. People from South America went to Venezuela to work in the oil industry. And, and I think the rise of populism, the rise of Hugo Chavez, the rise of some failed ideas to really keep up with the times. And you can see, in the case of Maduro and in the case of Nicaragua, very strong dictators. I mean, with Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua, we see also another crisis coming. What's going to happen with Nicaraguans? We're lucky in a way because Costa Rica is absorbing a lot of these immigrants. They're not coming, they're not joining their cousins on a journey north. But how long Costa Rica is going to be able to do that? So we have these two places where I think political intervention is needed. In the case of Venezuela, let's remember that if there is a consensus with Republicans and Democrats, is to isolate Venezuela as a matter of policy. And I think that is not a good approach, because when you isolate somebody, and let's learn from our lessons from Cuba, you engage, you are part of the conversation, so you have some credibility in terms of developing solutions. And I think in the case of Venezuela, it's going to be, they have to, they're negotiating the ways in which Maduro can step down and create elections. And then before investing into the country, because the country is going to come back online only with international aid, and it cannot be only loans, right? They have to pay. It has to be humanitarian aid that is going to address the devastation among people, the levels of hunger and destitution, before you start thinking about stopping the flow, and before you start thinking the long term, calling back the Venezuelans back home to rebuild the country with some support. And I think we see those steps, Peter, and I think it's interesting. And this is something that we need to grapple. Why is it that the people more engaged are the leftist government of Chile, Brazil, and Colombia? And the United States is absent. Mexico is now playing a role. And I think it's a good thing to be part of that. But I think before anything happens, the agreement is there has to be elections in Venezuela. There has to be a process of electing new leadership before foreign aid can start flowing into the country. And I think that's a good framework. And I think that's a framework that the United States can support, but we'll see if that works. With so many conflicts in the world, I don't think we're paying a lot of attention to Venezuela and other places like Nicaragua.
Thank you so much.
Jude, what question do you have?
First of all, I'd like to say that I wish that we would have more people coming from the outside joining us. So in any case, I guess a question that I have is, I haven't heard much said about the impact of, immigration going through Mexico, which must have a profound desettling economic impact also on Mexico. Could you sort of talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I think that, going to witness people so destitute, so in such bad shape going through our country is really sad. I was in Oaxaca City in July, and I saw a lot of Venezuelans, a lot of Haitians in the city of Oaxaca, which is a tourist town. I don't know if you've ever been, but it's a very tourist town. And they were in the middle, in the square. And I think there were several things. One, that there were grassroots organizations, civil society, ordinary citizens who were so moved by trying to help that they've been organizing on their own, trying to deliver some kind of aid. They were delivering food, they were delivering clothes, some medical students were delivering some healthcare. You see also people riding the train north, people organizing different stations, delivering food. But these are very tiny efforts. There is also, June, some Mexicans who reproduce that fear of the invasion of the immigrant, the foreigner, right? And there's this narrative that emerged that, these immigrants are thugs, they're stealing things, they're stealing property, they're bringing disease. And they're asking the government to also, despite the fact that Mexico is a country of migrants, they're asking for the state to respond in harsh ways. What's interesting is that the first people to see these problems are local municipal governments. It is not the state governments or the federal governments who are at the forefront of this fight. And this is kind of the paradox, and this is the toughest problem, because when they get to small places, is one thing that these immigrants come to Los Angeles, for example, or to New York, city. These are cities with massive amounts of resources, but they're complaining. Right now, the mayor of Los Angeles, the mayor of New York City are complaining that they gotten 20 buses in the last 6 weeks. What are they gonna do? Where are they gonna accommodate these migrants? And it's the same paradox for Mexico. These immigrants come along the route on the journey north, and it starts in the places like Chiapas, Oaxaca. They go to Mexico City, they go to Monterrey, and then they go to different cities in the north. And in all these cities, you see destitute human beings in need of help and support. And this has opened up, I think, a lot of discussions. Something that is different, though, than the United States is that all of these immigrants are very explicit about the fact that they want to come north. In a way, they don't want to stay in Mexico. Some do stay, some do end up staying for years before they make it to the United States. But I think that's one difference, right? That these immigrants are really saying that just let us go through. Let us go through your back patio, because we are going to the other house in the front. We're not staying in your house. We're going to the United States. And I think, on the other hand, that is not true. These immigrants, especially, from Haiti, some African immigrants who do not have there's no program, there's no temporary asylum for this program, for these immigrants. They end up staying in places like Tijuana. You have immigrants from Haiti who have been there for 10 years now. So that's interesting. And I think, June, you have this debate in Mexico, and I think I wanna be hopeful that the fact that Mexicans in Mexico, we have cousins, brothers and sisters in the United States who are immigrants and who know how hard it is to be an immigrant, and that would guide the way we respond to these immigrants. But not everybody's gonna respond in that same way. I see in very visible ways how local communities have responded very positively, but I've seen rallies against, Haitian immigrants in Tijuana, Mexicans with their Mexican flags, and Mexico is for Mexicans. That happens too, and we have to be careful not to reproduce a narrative of hate, a narrative of dehumanization for these immigrants. However, it is true that also Mexico doesn't have a lot of resources. However, we need to change our policy. Mexico could mobilize its, for example, there's something that's called the emergency plan, where Mexico can mobilize the army for humanitarian reasons whenever there is a disaster. So if there's an earthquake, if there's floods, if there's those natural resources, there is this system by which the Mexican can allocate resources to build tents, to mobilize and create hospitals, mobile hospitals, distribute food. That's what we need. I mean, honestly, there's a humanitarian crisis going on with these immigrants coming from Central America, South America, and Mexico needs to step up and respond in more humane ways, mobilizing its resources to alleviate the pain of these human beings. It will not, that kind of help will not alleviate the problem. And that's the debate. You know, some people's like, hey, do you give them food and encourage them to come more? But I think we see human beings suffering right now, and we cannot wait until we solve the roots of the problem before we are able to help these women and children. And I think that should be our first response. That has to change. Mexico has to mobilize its limited resources to respond to this humanitarian crisis. But it's still, it has to be an outcome of a political debate. And I think that's front and center. What to do with narcotraficantes and what to do with immigration is part of the political debate that we're having in this presidential election. So I'm hopeful that we're going to come to the right conclusion there.
Gaspar, you're a delight. You are every interviewer's dream as an interviewee, because you run with the question instead of just say, yes or no. But you're off with the question. And in that sense, as I say, you are a delight. Something
Thank
that,
you.
of course, one hopes for when one asks someone to come in a way to Chappaqua. And what a success you have been. So I'm going to hand you back to June, who will appreciate you even more, I'm sure, and close off our session. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you, Gaspar. You're wonderful.
No,
Thank you, Naomi.
I think you've also made some friends here in New York. So if you
Oh,
come,
that's so sweet.
please let us know. I think we would love to see you. But anyway, I think you have given us really a great appreciation of the issues and the ways that Mexico sees things and is trying to deal with them, and also its role that it's working on in both Central and South America, which I think, as you're saying, the United States has just not been able to pay attention to. So I think, it's very good that Mexico is taking on this role. So, thank you very much. Also, so those of you who are joining us, we look forward to seeing you on October 30. We will be back to our usual time of 10 a.m. And we will be joined by April Foley. So April Foley has spoken to us before. She was the former U.S. ambassador to Hungary, and she's going to be talking about the Western Balkans, another area that is that has had a long history of conflict, that still continues with conflicts going on, and is also on that sort of verge of leaning between Russia and leaning west. So they have sort of an interesting story going on that she will give us more insight to. And I hope you will join us next October 30 for another session of foreign policy. So thank you very much, Gaspar. We look forward to hearing everyone next week, in the next 2 weeks. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, June and Gaspar. That was wonderful. I think Don just paraphrased everything that everybody was thinking. Your enthusiasm kept us going. Thank you so much. And thank you for the planning committee. It was a wonderful morning. So thank you all. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Goodbye,
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, Gaspar.
Bye.
Bye.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.